Good evening and welcome to Q&A. I'm Tony Jones and answering your questions tonight, world-renowned evolutionary biologist and author of The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins. And wait a minute. Hold your applause just for a moment. And Australia's most senior Catholic churchman, the Archbishop of Sydney, Cardinal George Pell. Please welcome our special guest. OK, Q&A is live from 9:35 Eastern Time and simulcast on News 24 and News Radio. Go to our website to send a question or join the Twitter conversation using the hashtag on your screen. And stay tuned for the chance to join Quanda Vote. You can register on your smartphone or smart device at the address on the screen. The address is quandavote, quandavote.tv, I should say. Our first question tonight comes from Naomi Roseth.
At Easter, Australia's religious leaders invoke the name of God in order to preach peace, tolerance, political integrity, social and moral fortitude, all obviously positive and worthwhile values. My question is, in what way is the practice of these values dependent on an existing God? Is it possible for an atheist to be a peace-loving, socially responsible person?
Richard Dawkins, let's start with you.
Well, obviously the answer to that question is yes. I mean, that could hardly be otherwise. It is true that Christianity has adopted many of the best values of humanity, but they don't belong to Christianity or indeed to any other religion. I think it would be very sad if it were true that you really did need religion in order to be good. Because if you think about it, what that would mean would be either that you get your morals and your values from the Bible or the Quran or some other holy book, or that you are good only because you're frightened of God, because you don't want to go to hell or you do want to go to heaven. Now, as for getting your morals from the Bible, I very sincerely hope nobody does get their morals from the Bible. It's true that you can find the occasional good verse, and the Sermon on the Mount would be one example, but it's lost amid the awful things that are dotted throughout the Old Testament and actually throughout the New Testament as well, because the fundamental idea of New Testament Christianity, which is that Jesus is the Son of God who is redeeming humanity from original sin, the idea that we are born in sin, and the only way we can be redeemed from sin is through the death of Jesus. I mean, that's a horrible idea. It's a horrible idea that God, this paragon of wisdom and knowledge, power, couldn't think of a better way to forgive us our sins than to come down to earth in his alter ego as his son and have himself hideously tortured and executed so that he could forgive himself.
OK, let's go to George Pell on that.
Well, there's quite a few things that might be said. First of all, our tradition goes back about 4,000 years. So whatever these values are that we've taken over, we've got to go back a little bit of a distance. And it's interesting to look at pagan Rome before there was Christian influence. 40% were slaves. Men and women fought one another to the death in the Circus Maximus or the Colosseum. Women had no rights whatsoever. Infanticide was practiced regularly. The noble families didn't want baby girls. Christianity changed that, not perhaps by itself, but largely. And the Christian story, we're Christians, we're New Testament people. There was an evolution in the Old Testament, and there are some awful things there. It developed. The notion of God was purified as it went through the Old Testament.
Can I just interrupt you just to bring you to the point of the question, which was really about whether atheists can lead a good life and be good people and socially responsible and so on?
Yeah, absolutely.
You accept that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it helps to believe in God because there's the Polish poet Milosz who says that the opium of the people today is the belief that they won't be judged by God when they die, that those who have committed great crimes, done awful things, are going to get away with it, and that the people who've suffered unjustly, had terrible lives, that's it.
OK, let's move quickly to our second question. It's from Claire Bonner.
Religion is precisely often blamed for being the root of war and conflict. But what about all the good it has done for our society? God-centred religion has been the birthplace of schools, universities, hospitals, and countless developments in science as well. Richard, if you believe the human drive to seek the truth and to constantly improve ourselves is merely a mechanism for survival, then what's the point and why should I bother?
It's an astonishing idea to say, why should you bother just because we have a scientific understanding of why we're here. We do have a scientific understanding of why we're here, and we therefore have to make up our own meaning to life. We have to find our own purposes in life, which are not derived directly from our scientific history. When you say that Christianity has been responsible for a lot of good, including science, by the way, which is somewhat ironic, I think that most of the great benefits in humanity, such as the abolition of slavery, such as the emancipation of women, which the Cardinal mentioned both of, these have been wrung out of our Christian history without much support from Christianity. I, as an atheist, my friends as atheists, lead thoroughly worthwhile lives, in our opinion, because we stand up, look the world in the face up to the fact that we are not going to last forever. We have to make the most of the short time that we have on this planet. We have to make this planet as good as we possibly can and try to leave it a better place than we found it.
Now, to some degree, you've already answered this, but there is a follow-up question. I'm going to go to that now. It's from Rebecca Ray.
Okay, my question for you today is, without religion, where is the basis of our values? And in time, will we perhaps revert back to Darwin's idea of survival of the fittest?
Richard Dawkins, you can answer that, and I'll bring in Cardinal Pell.
I very much hope that we don't revert to the idea of survival of the fittest in planning our politics and our values and our way of life. I've often said that I'm a passionate Darwinian when it comes to explaining why we exist. It's undoubtedly the reason why we're here and why all living things are here. But to live our lives in a Darwinian way, to make a society a Darwinian society, that would be a very unpleasant sort of society in which to live. It would be a sort of Thatcherite society. And we want to, I mean, in a way, I feel that one of the reasons for learning about Darwinian evolution is as an object lesson in how not to set up our values and our social lives.
George Pell.
Well, it's interesting because I think in the space of about 2 minutes, Richard has said two different things. One of which is that science can't tell us why we're here, and then in the next minute, trying to say that it does.
No, I said it can tell us why we're here.
It can't.
Well, I simply contradict you in that case.
Well, what is the reason that science gives why we're here? Science tells us how things happen. Science tells us nothing about why there was the Big Bang, why there is a transition from inanimate matter to living matter. Science is silent on... we could solve most of the questions in science and it would leave all the problems of life almost completely untouched. Why be good?
There are... why be good is a separate question, which I also came to. Why we exist, you're playing with the word why there. Science is working on the problem of the antecedent factors that lead to our existence. Now, why in any further sense than that, why in the sense of purpose, is, in my opinion, not a meaningful question. You cannot ask a question like, why do mountains exist, as though mountains had some kind of purpose. What you can say is what are the causal factors that lead to the existence of mountains, and the same with life and the same with the universe. Now, science over the centuries has gradually pieced together answers to those questions. Why in that sense? It's true that there are still some gaps, but surely, Cardinal, you're not going to fall for the God of the gaps trap of saying that that religion is going to fill in those gaps which science has so far not yet answered.
No, I'm not going to be diverted at all. I'm happy to come back to that.
Okay.
We will be coming back to it because I know there are questions that relate to some of the bigger issues you're talking about, but you could respond and then we'll move on to our next question.
I hope I'll be allowed to.
You certainly
Thanks.
will.
It's part of being human to ask why we exist. Questioning distinguishes us from the animals. It's to ask why we're here. So I repeat, and this is a commonplace in science, science has nothing to say about that. As whatever it might say about mountains, it can't say what is the purpose of human life. And it's not Maggie Thatcher who was in the epitome or the personification of social Darwinism. It's Hitler and Stalin. Because it's the struggle for survival. The strong take what they can and the weak give what they must, and there's nothing to restrain them. And we've seen that in the two great atheist movements of the last century.
No, that's ridiculous. That is ridiculous. Nice unbiased audience you've assembled here, by the way. Right, let's clearly distinguish two things here. First, atheism had nothing to do with Hitler or Stalin. Stalin was an atheist, Hitler was not. It doesn't matter what they were with respect to atheism. They did their horrible things for entirely different reasons. Now, you are right when you say that aspects of what Hitler tried to do could be regarded as arising out of Darwinian natural selection. That's exactly why I said that I despise Darwinian natural selection as a motto for how we should live. I tried to say we should not live by Darwinian principles, but Darwinian principles explain how we got here and why we exist in the scientific sense. Now, Cardinal, you said it's part of human nature to want to ask the question why, in the sense of purpose. It may very well be part of human nature, but that doesn't make it a valid question. There are all sorts of questions which you can ask. What's funny about that? What is funny about that?
OK, we'd like the audience not to yell out. If we can do that, that'd be great. We're going to move on.
I didn't finish, I'm sorry.
OK, well, finish your point.
OK.
Because there are lots of questions pertaining to this. We will
The question why is not necessarily a question that deserves to be answered. There are all sorts of questions that people can ask, like, what is the colour of jealousy? That's a silly question.
Exactly.
Why is a silly question. Why is a silly question. You can ask, what are the factors that led to something coming into existence? That's a sensible question. But what is the purpose of the universe is a silly question. It has no meaning.
Could I just interpose very briefly?
Very briefly.
I think it's a very poignant and real question to ask, why is there suffering?
We will be asking that question, believe it or not. This is Q&A. It's live and interactive. Tonight we're experimenting with QuandaVote, a new way for Q&A viewers to share their opinions on the issues we discuss. You can go to the quandavote.tv website on your smartphone, tablet or computer to vote in our very first question, and that is, does religious belief make the world a better place? Does religious belief make the world a better place? We'll report back later on your views. First, let's move on to our next question for our panel. It comes from Paul Hanrahan.
My question is for Richard Dawkins. You're on the record as saying you can't prove that God doesn't exist, and you say you're agnostic rather than atheistic. Why do you appear as the champion of atheism around the world? Why do you accept offers to appear as the champion of atheism? And why are you so evangelical in the prosecution of your cause? Isn't that a touch hypocritical and unscientific?
Yes, Richard Dawkins, I'm a bit confused about this because you just referred to yourself moments ago as being an atheist, and yet with the Archbishop of Canterbury you referred to yourself as an agnostic.
In the God delusion, I made a 7-point scale. 1 is I'm totally confident there is a God. 7 is I'm totally confident there is not a God. 6 is, to all intents and purposes, I'm an atheist. I live my life as though there is no God. But any scientist of any sense will not say that they positively can disprove the existence of anything. I cannot disprove the existence of the Easter Bunny, and so I'm agnostic about the Easter Bunny. It's in the same respect that I'm agnostic about about God.
What proof, by the way, would change your mind?
That's a very difficult and interesting question because, I mean, I used to think that if somehow, you know, great big, giant, 900-foot-high Jesus with a voice like Paul Robeson suddenly strode in and said, "I exist, here I am." But even that, I actually sometimes wonder whether that would...
I think you're hallucinating.
Exactly. I agree. I agree.
Can I ask you, well, can I just put the question to you? Could you ever provide Richard Dawkins with the sort of proof he requires for belief, scientific proof of the existence of God?
No, because I think he only accepts proof that is rooted in sense experience. In other words, he excludes the world of metaphysics, say the principle of contradiction, and he excludes the possibility of arguments that don't go against reason, but go beyond it. But could I make one little suggestion as to why Richard calls himself an atheist? Because in one of his blogs in 2002, he was discussing whether he's an agnostic or a non-theist. He said he prefers to use the term atheist because it's more explosive, it's more dynamic. You can shake people up. Whereas if you're just going around saying that you're an agnostic or a non-theist, it's not... these are his own words.
Well, let's let Richard Dawkins...
I don't remember saying that. It wouldn't totally surprise me. It's in
2002.
It's an ongoing issue. What's the best way? There is a problem with the word atheist, especially in America. I don't know whether it's true in Australia. There's a lovely woman... I'm blocking on her name because I'm jet-lagged. She's Irish-American woman. Anybody help me?
There are quite a few Irish-American women. Sorry about that.
Sorry? No. Anyway, I do apologise personally to her for forgetting her name. She's an actress and she's got she did a film on how she escaped from the Roman Catholic Church, and it's a very moving film, and at the end her mother discovered that she was an atheist, and her mother phoned her up and said, "Well, I don't mind you not believing in God, but an atheist?" Her name's Julia Sweeney. It's suddenly come back to me. I strongly recommend that. Now, the point is that the word atheist, unlike just simply not believing in God, has bad connotations. And so, to some extent, people have wished to depart from that and change the name to non-theist or secularist or non-believer. And I waver back and forth as to what's the best name to use. I sometimes call myself an atheist, sometimes a non-theist, and sometimes just a non-believer.
George Pell, can I just come back to you on this question of the existence of God? Why would God randomly decide to provide proof of his existence to a small group of Jews 2,000 years ago and not subsequently provide any proof after that?
Well, I don't think there's ever been any scientific proof. I don't believe God does anything randomly, although he might set up a system which works apparently through, through chance, through random. But if you want to get if you want something done, you've got to ask somebody. It's no good, say, my asking everyone in the congregation, "Will you do something?" Normally you go to a busy person because you know they'll do it. And so, for some extraordinary reason, God chose the Jews. They weren't intellectually the equal of either the Egyptians or the...
Intellectually?
Intellectually, morally...
How can you know intellectually?
Because you see the fruits of their civilization. Egypt was the great power for thousands of years before Christianity. Persia was a great power. Chaldea. The poor, the little Jewish people, they were originally shepherds. They were stuck, they're still stuck between these great powers.
That's not a reflection of your intellectual capacity, is it, whether or not you're a shepherd?
Well... no, it's not, but it's a recognition, it is a reflection of your intellectual development. But like many people are very, very clever and not highly intellectual. But my point is...
Sorry, can I just interrupt? Are you including Jesus in that, who obviously was Jewish and was of that community?
Exactly.
So intellectually not up to it?
Well, that's... That's a nice try, Tony. The people, in terms of sophistication, the Psalms are remarkable. In terms of their buildings and that sort of thing, they don't compare with the great powers. But Jesus came not as a philosopher to the elite. He came to the poor and the battlers. And for some reason, he chose a very difficult, but actually they are now an intellectually elite, because over the centuries they've been pushed out of every other form of work. Jesus, I think, is the greatest, son of God, but leaving that aside, the greatest man that ever lived. So I've got a great admiration for the Jews, but we don't need to exaggerate their contribution in their early days.
All right, you're watching Q&A.